As we sort of get more and more efficient with technology, we get better and better at slicing and dicing people's backgrounds, but we're really just doing the same things but on steroids.
Welcome to UpTech Report. This is our Apply Tech series. UpTech Report is sponsored by Terraleap. Learn how to leverage the power of video at terraleap.io. Today, I'm excited to be joined by my guest, Omer Molad, who's based in Melbourne, Australia. He's the co-founder and CEO at Vervoe. Welcome, Omer. Good to have you on.
Hey, Alexander. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Now, Vervoe is a skill testing platform. I'm excited to dig into that, unpack it, but I'm going to start with, Omer, can you share what is the problem that you see in the marketplace and that you're set to solve?
The problem is that historically most hiring decisions have been made based on the wrong signals, the wrong information, particularly people's backgrounds. And in addition to that being unfair and excluding people who would otherwise be great at the job, it's also not productive and inefficient because you're not hiring based on the only thing that matters, someone's ability to do the job. Instead, you're focusing on how long they worked at a certain company or where they went to school, or maybe not deliberately, but how familiar they seem to you and how comfortable you are with that type of person and their background and those sort of things. And as we sort of get more and more efficient with technology, we get better and better at slicing and dicing people's backgrounds, but we're really just doing the same things but on steroids. And so what we're about is breaking that down and sort of getting back to the fundamentals of, well, can someone do the job? It doesn't matter if they're 50 years old or 20 years old, it doesn't matter their gender, it doesn't matter if they went to Harvard or they're self-taught, but can they actually do the job? And let's see them do that.
So according to your website, it says Vervoe's AI automatically assesses, grades, and ranks job candidates based on how well they can actually do the job. I mean, that's everyone loves to know, okay, how well can you do this job? But how does that actually work? How can you explain?
Yeah, so think about if you were a restaurant owner and you wanted to hire someone to work in the kitchen, or you wanted to hire someone to work as a waiter in that restaurant. So the best way to do that is to actually have them come in and do a shift, and then you'll know everything you need to know. You'll see how they interact with others, how they work with customers, how they make an omelette, whatever it is that, and you'll get to see that in your environment. So if it's at a Chick-fil-A or a Nando's, that's going to be very different to like a 5-star restaurant. So context matters. And so now imagine that you have a vacancy and you have 200 people applying for that vacancy. You can't bring all 200 in to spend to do a shift with you. And so what you end up doing is eliminating 199 of them, or you may probably eliminating 195 and interviewing 5, and that, which is the traditional hiring process. And so what we do is we let you bring that person in for a shift, but we do that virtually. We do the digital version of that. And so that's kind of the principle. We're not trying to replicate interviewing, which is basically chit chat. We're trying to replicate the concept of a job trial or an audition and digitize that. And how we do that practically is we've created a way for candidates to engage in scenarios that are relevant to different jobs on the internet, and then analyze how they respond and sort through that and rank them.
Digital egg flipping. But I'm curious, like, what are actual jobs ready skills that are being tested for in this process?
Yeah, so it can really be anything, but let's take some examples. It can be a design role where you actually design the logo or design an onboarding flow and then answer a bunch of questions around why did you do it this way, and maybe a number of knowledge questions. In a sales role, it might be doing a presentation or doing a mock cold call or writing prospecting emails. It might be then facing a challenging situation with a customer. In a customer service role, it can be a range of customer situations. In a healthcare role, it might be dealing with someone who can't hear you, and how do you actually, and you have to administer medication, and how do you sort of overcome that? And it's not the theory, it's the practice. So asking people, putting them in that scenario and then getting them to do it. In a finance job, it might be getting someone to do something in Excel and do a valuation, do a discounted cash flow, reconcile a ledger. So it's getting as close as possible to actually performing tasks. With obviously there are some limitations. Performing cardiothoracic surgeries, a little bit more challenging on the internet, but for most jobs, and most particularly jobs that are performed in an office, or what we call knowledge worker type roles, it's actually quite easy to test in a digital setting.
If I look at the different levels, I think we talked about this last time we chatted, of unskilled labor, semi-skilled labor, skilled labor, astrophysicists, and CO level. You don't play at all of them, where you really focus on the semi-skilled and skilled labor. Is that correct?
That's right. And that's about 2/3 of the market. So semi-skilled is roles that are typically the higher volume roles. So hospitality, high volume call center, retail, warehouse, those kind of roles where typically not always hourly workers, can be hourly workers, can be permanent salaried workers, but typically the sort of higher volume type roles. Still a degree of skill that you want to test. Typically shorter tenure in an organization, and so with those type of roles, the primary problem that employers have is efficiency. So they've got a high volume of applicants to sort through. And they want to be able to do that quickly and efficiently. And typically the method is a 7 to 15 minute sort of shorter form assessment of what we call the top of the hiring funnel, which means the point of application. And then in the skilled space, there's typically more highly skilled people, often known as like white collar, not a term we love using, but knowledge workers. So software engineers, enterprise salespeople, these sort of people, but also healthcare, more technical roles, typically performed in an office, today more so at home, remotely, but those kind of roles, not a high volume of applicants. So you might be dealing with 5 to 30 people, but a more rigorous assessment. So testing coding skills, behaviors, on the job skills, but in context of the job, just like we discussed, selling umbrellas is different to selling enterprise software. So there's no such thing as sales, there's sales in context, and prospecting is different from closing, and being a registered nurse in, an emergency department is different from a personal care in aged care, and so on. And so we put people in, so these are more rigorous, sort of advanced assessments for these kind of more highly skilled roles.
This is a unique point that I want to bring out again. You said you don't want just any salesperson. You want the right salesperson for what you are trying to sell, or the right healthcare person for what you're trying to do. Your product, it's a no-code solution. I mean, like, you don't need a developer to go in and use it. They should be able to create their own workflows from your templates of these skill testing workflows. That's
right. So 90+% of our clients start hiring same day, as that they're onboarded. There are some exceptions in the enterprise when they want a highly customized workflow or highly customized assessments. But generally speaking, it can be plug and play if you want it to be. And you're typically either leveraging an existing assessment, so from our library, or most commonly you're taking something existing and tweaking it, customizing it to suit your needs. And we're also learning from your preferences. So we help you train our models, and this is where the context comes in. So if we had a graphic designer role and we had 100 people complete a design challenge for that role, a Series A startup versus Deloitte would probably have different preferences about the kind of person that they want and how they want them to perform that role, even though it's the same job title, right? So at a startup, it would be, why haven't you shipped this already? And at Deloitte, it would be, let's have a couple more meetings and discuss and present and have a committee, and then probably not decide much and revise. And, and so I say that with affection because I've worked in big enterprise for years. And so, those companies would index for slightly different things. We would learn from their preferences and we would adjust. So what that means is, it doesn't mean that the worst candidate for the startup is going to be the best for Deloitte, but they'll be ranked slightly differently. And that matters. Context matters.
The concept of automating, streamlining, finding the right candidate, how much is really automated? Like if they're taking these skill tests, how far is your AI assessing and grading? A design, let's take that example, a design person, and they do a test and they design something. Where does the handoff happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. It really depends on the role and also depends on how the company wants to do things. But so in some cases, it would be, we would probably knock out the all the top of funnel, so the resume and the phone screening and even a chunk of the interviewing. So typically we would replace about 2/3 of interviewing as well. So the interview ratio would, interview to hire ratio would reduce by 2/3. So essentially, instead of interviewing, 10 people, you'd interview 3 and then hire 1, right? And you would then go from, so it says you have 100 applicants, you would do 10 interviews. Now you're going to have 100, you'll interview 3 and you'll hire 1, but also not only interviewing fewer, the interviews are very different. You don't have to verify that they can do the job during the interview. You've done that already. So in the interview, you can actually sell to the candidate, which is more important, particularly in today's market. And you can focus on, are we a good fit for each other? How do we set you up for success on the role? Those kind of things. Now, some companies use us all the way to offer. So particularly for the semi-skilled, higher volume roles, they automate absolutely everything. But as the role gets more skilled, there's an inverse relationship between sort of skill and automation. So there'll be, the assessment will be a reference point, but you'll also want to spend more time. So let's say you're hiring a VP of sales, you wouldn't expect to automate the majority of that hiring process, nor would the candidate expect that. But the assessment might be a component of that. And then you probably want to have a series of discussions before you make a senior hire. The key point is that for the highly skilled roles, the problem we solve, we call it confidence, whereas for the semi-skilled high volume, it's more efficiency. So for high skilled roles, there's not an efficiency problem, right? Time is not the issue. You're making a very senior hire. It's not about saving time. It's about having confidence to make the right choice. And we help you reduce information asymmetry by giving you a really strong signal about functionally being able to do the job.
The information that it's providing, highly skilled, it's I appreciate that point. It's like you're giving that confidence score versus more of an automating for the higher volume. Is it giving a number? Is it simply saying, all right, this person is a 72% on their salesman ability?
Yes, so we in each assessment we test a number of skill groups, and they can be what we call job-specific skills, often known as hard skills, or they can be general work skills applicable to many jobs, often known as soft skills behaviors. So, and you can determine what you want to test. It can be assertiveness, and it can also be negotiation. Okay. And so we'll give a score for each skill group, but that score is not some global benchmark because our assessments are not out of the box. Those scores are determined by, they're relevant to the sort of mean group in that cohort that you're testing, right? So that's an important point. So it's not some 76 it's not like doing your SATs and you know what that means. It's relative to the other people doing that assessment and relative to how hard that assessment is and how you've trained the model. So you can, for example, we can discover, let's say we put 100 people through an assessment and the vast majority of them get over 80. That tells us that the assessment's probably too easy for that role. And we'll want to A, change the assessment, and B, we're probably, in the way that we're grading people and training the models, there's something to do there as well. And so really you typically want some sort of normal distribution. And then when you've optimized the models, the scores can mean a great deal because you've got a sort of benchmark that you're working to that makes sense for that assessment.
There's a lot to unpack from what you just shared, both from the concept of what you're assessing, soft skills, hard skills. We'll come back to that. But you also talk about this model, how it is varied based on these different pieces, and you use the word model. And I'm wondering if it might scare a few people of like, wait, am I having to manage this model? I don't know anything about data science and machine learning, and how does this work? How much does someone need to understand this, and how much is it just does it? What's that balance?
Yeah, so the amount of understanding that you need to have as a user is zero in terms of data science. What you do need to understand really well, and what we expect you to understand, is what a good hire looks like for your company and for your role, right? So if you're a hiring manager or you're a recruiter, we expect you know that. We don't expect that you'll know how to test for that. And we don't expect that you'll know anything about AI, machine learning, all this other nonsense. Like that's just like, so we expect that you can tell us what do you care about in an enterprise seller or in a designer or in a cook or in a delivery driver. We expect that you'll know, and you might not know to do that in the proper jargon or lingo or term, but you'll know how to describe it in human terms. And if you can do that, we do the rest. Okay. So, and the way that we make it easy for you to tell us what you care about. We ask you to describe the skills for the role. That generates the assessment. You can then review it. You can then swap questions in and out. Then you approve that. Then the candidates complete it. And then we select automatically a sample of responses that are anonymized. And we ask you to grade them. And we say, hey, is this a good response? Yes or no? And we learn what you care about, right? So we don't talk about, you won't see anywhere inside our product, machine learning, all these kind of things. We just say, hey, click here to optimize the grading, and we get you to respond, to look at like, I don't know, it might be 18 responses or something. It depends. And we learn from you, and good answer, medium answer, bad answer. And then we go, oh, now we know what you care about. We can now get closer and closer and closer to how you would grade yourself without the technology, but we'll do it for you while you sleep.
What this makes it interesting is I made a hire early this year, and I actually gave it to someone. Hey, can you go make this job post? And then they came back, and there was over 100 applicants. We were just trying to hire one person. And they're like, I'm not really sure, because they were doing it for me, who's a good person. So they showed me a couple ones. And I'm like, well, I like this. I don't like that. I like this. Then they had to go through the rest and do it. They didn't actually do a good job. I ended up having to just go through them all myself. And this idea makes it sound like you're going through a similar process. You're just training an AI to say, I like this, I don't like this, I like this, and then it can accurately find more.
Based on tasks, not based on how people do tasks and in an anonymized way. We don't care like what you look like, your name, your background, your this. So if you think about what I described, how we're optimizing these models, how we're teaching the models what we care about, it's purely based on how someone responded to a question or performed a task that's relevant to the role. They don't even know who did it. They don't even know the candidate's name. So they're training the model by saying, well, this person responded well to this scenario, this person didn't. And so that surfaces the people who are the best performers of the job, not the people so when I say like, or, it's really the answers that you like, not the person that you like. That's an important distinction.
Very important. I'm glad you raised that, because there's a lot of concern and fear, I think, around bringing AI into the recruitment space because of bias and missing things and et cetera. but it sounds like you're trying to bypass the bias and get right to ideally the right candidates.
Yeah, and we're
Is that
not, and we're also not prescriptive. So we don't say hire Bob. We say, look, there are two kind of inputs. The first is the assessment itself. So which as a user you sign that off. So this is what we're testing, how we're testing. And then the second is the grading framework, which you as a user optimize. And then what you get is a stack rank of candidates, and then you can decide what to do with that. So you can then decide anyone over 75, I'm progressing to the next stage. It could be on-site interview. All right. That's up to you. You could also say, I'm going to talk to everyone until you get comfortable. We don't say hire Bob. Bob is 82% or Bob suits a role in sales. What we say is based on the role that you're filling and the criteria you set, your competency framework, the skills you said are important. This is who performed well, okay, based on the grading criteria you told us matter for you. That's essentially what we're doing, but based on performance. That's what matters. So we don't know. It's full equalization. The Harvard graduate and the self-taught person, they're on a level footing coming into the assessment. It's just how you perform. If you and I did the same assessment, the software doesn't know the difference between us. It just knows how we actually engage with the tasks.
Coming back to this hard skills and soft skills, we kind of like talked about, okay, this is how someone could answer, but could you give me some examples of each one of how you guys deliver that type of testing for hard skills?
Well, let's talk about resilience. I think most people as a skill, and some people think it's a personality trait, but personality traits are really things that don't change over the course of our lifetime, and skills are typically things that can be learned and can be influenced and change. Now, if I said to you resilience, or to most people the word resilience, you probably got a sense of what that means. You might think I'm tough, I can bounce back from things. That's the kind of connotation. Now, so how do we test for resilience? Now, let's say that we're talking about a sales development rep. So someone who's doing cold calling, they need to be resilient because they're going to hear no a lot. And so they need to kind of bounce back and keep. So you can test for that in the context of that role. You can put people in these kind of scenarios where, they hear no a lot and see how what do they do and how do they respond. Okay, now let's say that you're a 911 emergency operator, okay? And you're constantly getting phone calls of people that have been stabbed or heart attack and that kind of stuff. You also need resilience, but it's very different. Resilience to the salesperson who's doing prospecting, which is kind of a bit of a game, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if we're going to now evaluate someone's suitability to be an emergency response, to work in an emergency call center environment, well, we're probably going to test their resilience differently. We're going to test it in that context, not the context of the cold calling person, right? And so when we talk about soft skills, we always caution people, like, don't generalize. Don't think about, are they resilient? Think about, are they resilient in your context? I'll give you another example, attention to detail. I don't consider myself having good attention to detail, but some people think I have really good attention to detail. You know why? Because I think for a CEO, I have okay attention to detail. For a librarian, I have terrible attention to detail, right? And so, the level of attention to detail you need in my job is different to a CFO and different to a librarian and different to a data entry person, completely different. So I come back to this point of context matters. So let's not talk about attention to detail. Let's talk about attention to detail in this job, which can be very different for each job.
When you're looking at the actual assessment to, and I appreciate the distinction between in that job role or in this job, and you're looking at the actual assessment, is simply like a multiple choice question of
No.
how is that? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's usually mostly open-ended. I mean, it can be multiple choice, but we have quite a broad spectrum of formats for both the question and the answer. So the question could be a text question, could also be a video where you ask the candidate to watch a video. The answer can be anything from written, recorded over video, audio. It can be documents, spreadsheets. It can be presentations. It can be images.
If someone's writing up a paragraph of a response or recording a video, you're saying your AI can review that and get an assessment from it?
That's correct. That's correct. So essentially, and I'll go even further. So analyzing written responses is easy. Now think about analyzing responses where there's no right or wrong answer, like designing a logo, right? What's a good logo? Who knows? So essentially, we have three ways, and we could have a whole other session just on this, but I'll try and I'll dumb it down as much as possible and keep it really simple. So essentially, our machine learning models learn in three ways. The first is there's a macro data set that's constantly evolving. So we look at all responses from all candidates, all assessments, and we look at how they're graded by all employers, and we detect patterns. And there are a lot of trends and patterns that are influenced by how people are responding, not so much what they're responding with. So think about if you run an assessment center and you've got a one-sided mirror and you're observing people and be not actually hearing exactly what they're saying, you can learn a lot from that. So we do the digital version of that. The second is the substantive response itself. So we look at, we analyze transcripts of videos. We have like suggested answers. So it's the actual correct versions of correct answers, which we can compare to. So now you're getting much more granular. And then the third, which I touched on earlier, is the preferences. So where each company then teaches us what it cares about. And so off the bat, we get to about 80% accuracy. And what that means is within 20% of how you'd grade yourself without knowing anything about you or your preferences, so for any assessment. And then the rest of the 20% is based on your preferences, where you teach us and we optimize from 80 to theoretically 99 point whatever, but it really depends at that point. And so the goal for us, again, it's not to say hire Bob. It's to say, hey, if you were to grade these 100 candidates manually, this is how you would do it. We got you really close to that. Now take the top chunk of people and do whatever you want with them. That's what we're trying to do. And that's where the automation comes in. We haven't invented some grading matrix. We don't know what's good. You know what's good.
All right. You're really fascinated right at this point, and I appreciate you keeping it brief, but I am fascinated with it. You're able to just look at complete text answers or even video responses and transcribe it and then review it. And based off of these three levels, the macro, the specific, and then fine tuning the final 20% off of the individual users. I haven't quite seen that anywhere else. And I find
that's because no one else does that. And
they say with a smile, like, yeah, I know.
Right.
If I can for a moment, what about, you said Excel spreadsheets or doing Excel or doing something else for those, designing an image. Are you able to review those? Like how does that work?
Yeah, so it depends on the media format. So there are certain things that we'll be able to look at substantive responses, and there are other things that we'll look at more the behavioral, sort of the signals around how you perform the task, like how long did it take you, what order did you do it in, keystrokes, these kind of things. It depends. In Excel, we can look at or it's actually Google Sheets, so we've embedded the Google App Suite, but let's call it spreadsheets. We can look at how you're engaging with the task. We can then also look at there can be correct answers. So we can say, if you answered 7, it's this. If you answered 9, you'll get this many points. You can set it up in that way. So it depends sort of how specific you want to get. It's the same with code challenges. You can have like sort of actually correct output. So you can run code and either works or doesn't, or it makes a triangle or it doesn't. But you could also look at how people, the quality, the sort of the quality of the code, how the length, errors, how people are spending their time. You can analyze the sort of the method in addition to the substantive answer. And then you learn, and over time you figure out like what's what's good, what's less good, what does that company care about? Yeah.
The description of the coding and the spreadsheets totally makes sense. Did you say is it able to detect the efficiency of the design as well? Like, how did you create something that looks nice? It doesn't go that far.
No, design's a lot more challenging and probably the most subjective thing. But we've had a lot of success with design roles. Typically, so the way a design assessment would work most commonly is there would be one, max two practical kind of assignments, and then there'd be a whole series of questions talking about the work or testing other things like knowledge and preferences of the candidate. So there might be like design this and then record a video talking about it. And it's usually cumulatively all the insight that we gather from the entire assessment can get us pretty close, is pretty predictive of who's going to be good. It's very rare that you'll have someone score very highly and then look at their work and it'll be terrible, or vice versa, because usually all the other things that all the other sort of insight we're gathering from the candidate will be consistent with that. But design is an area where I would say there's definitely an element of human verification when it comes to subjectivity, particularly around brand design. So, I think with more scientific design like product design or user onboarding, it's probably more mechanics. But if it's something like brand and logo, there's going to be, you could have 10 different opinions, right? Yeah. So it depends.
Coming back to the soft skills or resiliency, and the fascinating piece of it, someone just writing an open-ended response or just recording a video, and then you're able to rate that. Do you think people will start to figure it out? Like, I'm trying to figure out how to best describe this, just as people are constantly hunting now SEO and trying to find the best way to rank. I kind of feel like this will be the future, that more and more companies will go to these automated systems because it makes sense. And this is a two-part question. It's like, one is, how does someone succeed in it? But also, how could it be gamed? And how are you preventing that?
So the best way to succeed is to actually be yourself. And if you're confident in your ability to do the job, then this is a great platform for you to showcase that and not be disqualified unfairly. There are, and I think for questions that are more subjective, it's impossible to game it. Now, what can be gamed is for questions that have a right or wrong answer. And that's why we don't do anything out of the box. So when you look at folks that are doing survey style multiple choice, well, it's only a matter of time before those questions appear on Google, right? Now, we've got a question bank feature. So we could have, for example, for a given assessment, 50 questions, but it chooses 12 each time for each candidate. So they each get different questions. So even if they posted the assessment on the internet, the next question will get different questions. The next candidate, will get different questions. But I mean, even that can be, there's a point where you can, so at the end of the day, when you're asking someone to do real task as opposed to just knowing an answer, how do you game that? How do you game it? Unless you're like committing fraud, like literally paying someone to do it instead of you. There are a ton of ways to prevent that, but that's a different, now you're getting into like proctoring and IP detection and, but that's actually fraud. Okay. So just to be clear about that. Whereas if someone prepares themselves to the point where they actually can perform the job, that's not gaming. They've upskilled themselves. Good for them, right? So if someone practiced and got to the point, I mean, if you look at, say, case study style interviews that McKinsey and the management consulting firms do, if someone practices a lot to the point where they do really well, that's good. They didn't game it. They performed. They prepared themselves well. Now, it's highly unlikely that someone's going to get to the point where they can like fake being an ER nurse. I mean, that's just not right? It's going to take you years of study to get to that point.
And then you're not faking it anymore because you studied it. Yeah.
So the point is that by putting people in scenarios that are job specific and by making it open-ended and subjective rather than kind of right or wrong, it's very hard to game.
Because I can imagine a lot of folks that could be I don't know. I don't know if concern is the right word, but they're wondering, as an employee or potential hire, everything's getting automated. How do I know I can succeed in these new systems? Because I see both sides. I see the employer or the team that's wanting to hire. This could be a great tool to automate and streamline. But from the employee side, it's like it can be scary.
I hear you. When eBay launched, I was worried about putting my credit card on the internet to buy something. As was everyone else. And now we have, there's probably like 1,000 organizations that have my credit card, and you can tap your card without even entering up to $100. We have PayPass, and you just tap it and it pays. And soon we'll be able to like blink and we'll pay, and we'll end up buying things. So I think there's a natural, there's a natural sort of evolution to get to a point of maturity where people, where some of these anxieties are alleviated. I think until then, the onus is on us to communicate well and to demystify and to help both companies and candidates understand this isn't voodoo. Don't get caught up in some article you read on Business Insider that AI is taking your job or automating HR, all this. That's just nonsense, right? So, it's not helpful to generalize about all these things. What we do is we put you in the scenarios you'd face on the job, which if you're confident in your ability to do the job, you should be thrilled about, because we actually help you showcase your talent. You 100% of candidates get an opportunity to showcase their talent without being unfairly screened out of the process. So as a candidate, I'd be, jumping up and down with joy. We don't eliminate anybody. We present candidates in a ranked order based on how well they perform those tasks in accordance with the criteria that the company sets, right? We're not hiding anything. There's no black box. Our clients, when they ask us how it all works, we sit down and explain it to them. We can reconcile the grading for them. We don't say it's a secret. We show them how to teach, how to train the models. And so, sure, I can understand that if you've never used technology before and you're doing the sort of resume interview game thing, then this is a big leap. But, storing data in the cloud, that was scary too. Everyone wanted to have servers on site, and we overcame that. I think AWS will, if you look at their revenue, you'll see that
they show that
overcame that in a big way. And so I think there'll be a natural evolution where people understand that, these things are largely okay. And also on top of that, when I read about, I always find it fascinating when I read about, there was this article about Amazon that they had some AI that they canceled because it I think it deprioritized women, or, and of course everyone says, oh, that's terrible. But humans have been doing that for years. Humans have been deprioritizing women for years, and nobody said anything about it. Where was the article on that, right? So like, I don't know why people think that humans make better decisions than computers. That's categorically incorrect. We're terrible decision makers. Right? And so, but we get really upset when an algorithm makes a decision and it's unfair. Well, we taught the algorithm. Humans taught the algorithm. The algorithm didn't grow. It's not Skynet, right? So Terminator reference for anyone wondering what I'm talking about. So, I think...
what's the solution then? Like, how do we make sure we're progressing in the right direction? If you say we're building these, how do we make sure we're not building in bias?
We get better. We get better over time. That's why everything we do it's what's called machine learning. It learns. We get better. It's like everything with technology. It's not perfect in the beginning. When the first car that we made, it was crap. Now we have better cars. Now they're basically almost silent, and some of them don't even use fuel, and soon they'll drive themselves. Now, the first autonomous vehicle that runs over a pedestrian, oh my God, just wait for the headlights. Going to be, but how many people run over pedestrians with their human operated vehicle? And that's fine. We've accepted that. It's factored in. So we'll get better over time. There'll be acceptance over time. It's inevitable that computers are going to play a bigger and bigger role in hiring. Humans, they don't have the time and they don't have the discretion. And that's just a fact. And people might get upset at me saying that, but there wouldn't be so many solutions like ours if humans were great at hiring. We suck at it. We suck. Turnover is ridiculous. Bad hires, the number of bad hires is insane. The cost of bad hires, it's in the trillions, right? And there's a reason for that. Now, I'm not claiming that like software is the answer to everything, no, okay? And I'm not claiming that AI is the answer at all, but we will get better. We will continue to automate the things that humans aren't good at. We will continue to use data to give people insight, and we will continue, yes, to make mistakes, and people will create headlines from those mistakes, and we will overcome those mistakes and learn and get better. We get better.
I can tell your passion, Omer, when you get into this, and like you fully believe that software should be able to help. That there is a solution, that you shouldn't be afraid of machine learning, and I appreciate that view. The proof is always in the pudding, and so the more people try it, the more it learns, the more you can improve. And if anything, I'm excited, but it's the balance of the two. So if you had to make a prediction 2-3 years from now, I mean, where do you think what are we going to see? Is it going to be mass adoption, or is it going to take another 10 years before more hiring is automated?
So rather than trying to predict, what we did was we tried to measure, because we also don't, we also had a thesis that this method that I've described to you that we use of bringing someone in for a shift, the job trial, that it's better. But at the end of the day, people will say, okay, but is it better? And there's only so much marketing and spin that people have patience for. So we said, okay, well, we need to prove it. There's a portion of the market that will adopt based on the idea, and the rest of the market, the early majority, late majority, and laggards, will only adopt when there's proof. So we said, okay, let's get the proof. So what we do now is we ask people when they've made a hire on our platform, have you made a hire? Who'd you hire? Click, I hired John. I hired Betty. Okay, who was the hiring manager? And we ask for the name and email. And what we then do is 120 days later, so we allow for like up to 30 days of transition and then 90 days on the job. That's the sort of how we got to that. We survey the hiring manager and we say, hey, hiring manager, Sarah. Hi, Sarah. You hired John a few months ago. Would you hire John again, knowing what you know now? Can you rate John out of 10? And is there any other feedback you want to give us? And we do that for everybody. And that's the only thing that matters. All the efficiency and saving time and confidence, that's terrific. At the end of the day, either John was a better employee or not, right, than what you would have otherwise hired. So we get that data, plus a lot of other data and a lot of other conversations. This is an automated survey, and we learn from our customers. And what we've discovered is that the people being hired through our platform are performing better than the people not hired through our platform, are staying longer, and are less likely to be bad hires. Okay. And so what we can then do is say, okay, now let's look at the top performers. How did they score in the assessment? What skills were they good at? Let's index on for that. So we know that in sales, people who are resilient do well and all these kind of things, and we can start building out a taxonomy. It's important I mention that because you've been asking about how do we know we're not being, hoodwinked by all this. Well, that's how we know that it works. Now, when you ask me for my prediction, I think if we can get people to the point where we give them confidence, we move away from the noise and we give them confidence that it's not about AI or automation or any of this stuff. It's about, we've got a method that works, it gets you better employees in less time. it's as simple as that, then commercial logic would suggest that, sure, there'll be speed bumps, there'll be people who resist, there'll be all stuff, but eventually, like, commercial logic would suggest that it makes sense to go down this path. Now, what we saw in the pandemic was this huge kind of shift towards online working, online hiring, not just Zoom, but also hiring remotely, and online interviewing, and people had no choice. So the vast majority of people that are hiring, that they've taken one small step where they use the internet. Okay, they're not necessarily doing it in a task-based way like we would advocate, but they've come one step. Mm-hmm. They've taken one step on that journey. So that helps us. So now we can help them take the rest of the steps and move away from resumes and unstructured interviewing and poor signals that are not predictive, to sort of skills-based hiring. I can't tell you if it's 12 months or 10 years. I can tell you that there's rapid adoption happening already, and that the majority of the market's already on the internet in some shape or form. So that's encouraging. And I can tell you that what we do works, and we have the proof. So when I put all that together, that makes for a very bullish outlook. And the rest is really up to us to, sell the message and convince people that this is going to make their lives better than what they were doing before, make their job easier.
Based in Melbourne, do you see any difference based off of where people live, as far as who you hire, how you hire? Is there difference in culture and process as you started to work with different areas?
Some people like to think so. I would say not much. I think so. Our 70% of our client base. So we're in 70 plus countries, and a small part of our client base is here in Australia, but 70+% is outside, and our biggest country is the US. So we work everywhere, and we see clients everywhere and candidates everywhere in multiple languages. And, there are nuances, but at the end of the day, I think the differences are small, particularly around when you're talking about English-speaking countries. There are local factors like stimulus and the government stimulus and lockdowns, and governments have behaved differently, but the private market largely behaves in the same way. So we see the same challenges with companies and the same challenges with candidates. All the themes you're hearing about in the US around the Great Resignation and remote work, they're everywhere. It's the same. The world's flat. So we don't see huge differences in how people are thinking about talent, or how individuals are thinking about their careers across the world. The themes are common.
Do you see an increase because of COVID and this change of mentality? Or maybe I don't need to either A, hire people locally, or B, as an employee, have to work for someone locally. Do you see a shift?
Definitely. I think there's a greater recognition that you can think differently about where people can be based. So there are multiple levels. There's remote and there's distributed, right? So there's some people saying, well, you all have to be in this location, but you don't have to come into the office. And there's some people saying you can be anywhere. We're going to have different locations in the world, but we're going to have offices in each of them. And then then there's like, well, you can be anywhere in the world and work from your couch and that kind of thing. Now, it's funny, we kind of find it all pretty fascinating, because we've been globally distributed from day one, and people said that, there were VCs that said, you'll never succeed. You need everyone in an office in San Francisco. I've got it in writing. It's pretty comical today to hear that kind of stuff. But that we were literally told those kind of things. You have to have an office with a sign out the front, and a meeting room and an address. And there are...
Who needs that anymore?
There are companies worth hundreds of billions today that people have never met each other and never been in an office, right? So we know that that's possible. That's not to say there aren't benefits to being together physically. And I think a lot of us are still figuring that out. But there's definitely a shift, 100% a shift.
Is there any soft skills that you're testing for that actually benefit a distributed team or remote team?
Yeah, and you know, we've even found with our own hiring, we've come across some people who would otherwise be great, but not really suited to sort of autonomous working. So I'll give you an example. Someone who needs a high degree of structure and prescriptive management style, and doesn't like ambiguity or sort of chaos, they're going to struggle. They might struggle in a remote working environment because they need structure in their day. So one of the challenges, as you know, in working remotely is you need to structure your own day, and your interactions, the sort of, you know, the in-office workday is highly structured because you sort of tend to come in when everyone else comes in. There are meetings, and then there are these fleeting interactions where someone swings past your desk. When you work remotely, it's the opposite. There's no structure and there's no fleeting interactions. You have to generate the interactions. And also you have to make choices: email, Slack, phone, Zoom. What method do I choose? So people have to be quite deliberate about that style of working. For example, you're not seen or observed. And so some people freak out that, well, nobody knows if I'm doing anything, or vice versa. Like, are the people that report to me doing anything, or are they just sitting at home and watching TV? So you can't, that kind of stuff is problematic in remote working, which requires a high degree of trust, autonomy, independence. So you can test for those things. And absolutely you can. And so for example, what kind of management style does someone respond well to? Highly prescriptive, or do they need a high degree of autonomy and freedom? Do they thrive when they have freedom and they'll just report to you? And some people, that can't do that. They can't work autonomously and then just ring the bell if there's an issue, or they need to be told what to do all the time. And that's more difficult when you're not sitting next to each other. And so you can test for all those things, and it's important when you're hiring people remotely, or when they're working remotely.
So definitely for those that are listening, your next hire, if you are distributed now, you won't find that on a resume necessarily, but finding a way to test if they're good at
you won't. And what will happen is the people who struggle in that environment, they'll leave because they'll be lonely and they'll feel a strong sense of isolation, and they won't thrive and do their best work, and they won't be good at communicating what they're doing or their problems. And it becomes, now you can teach these things, but you can also test for these things. And it's also about employee onboarding and setting expectations. Well, how do we work in this company? So when people have never worked remotely and they join a company that's working remotely, you shouldn't assume as a manager that they're just going to know what to do. It's completely different.
If anything, getting these results back by them taking these tests, it doesn't mean you can't hire them, but it gives you the confidence and awareness of what you may need to train them on. If you like them and everything else, you just know you need to train them on this.
That's a great point. And that's also why you want to come to the interview already knowing these things, so you can discuss them and say, hey, here's some things to think about when we work together, as opposed to asking resume questions during the interview to figure out, like, tell me about a time where you did this thing. You don't need to do that anymore. You've already verified all their skills. Now you can meet them and say, okay, you're wonderful at the job. You've never worked remotely. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how we can communicate with each other when we work together.
For those that want to learn more about Vervoe, you can head over to vervoe.com. That's vervoe.com. Thank you so much, Omer. It was great to have you on today.
Thanks so much, Alexander.
And we'll see you all on the next episode of UpTech Report. Have you seen a company using AI, machine learning, or other technology to transform the way we live, work, and do business? Go to uptechreport.com and let us know.